One of the problems with trying to farm in a little bit of a more wild and natural way is that you lose animals. So we need to go and find a lamb. Hello and welcome back to Brynwood Farm. And I am now on a mission to go and traverse my wild habitat in search of a sheep because it has disappeared. One thing that hasn't disappeared today are the goats, which are not out all the time because I don't trust goats to not go where they shouldn't. And that is one downside of having the wilder farm and allowing the animals to free range, is that goats in particular tend to go where they're not supposed to. So every night the goats are brought in because I don't trust them and I don't want to be in bed thinking, where the hell are my goats? So they come in, but in the daytime they roam. When I moved to the farm 3 years ago, I had very set ideas of what I wanted to do, and I never wanted to become an industrial farmer, ploughing great fields and growing arable crops and having sheep on very close cut grass. I always wanted to be slightly more regenerative and work alongside nature. But that still meant that I had ideas of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to strip graze sheep and move them from paddock to paddock every day. I wanted to do the similar thing with the goats and the pigs. And as the farm has evolved, I've realised that for me and for that space, it's not achievable. In particular because I have goats and sheep that don't stay within electric fields. So this year, I have changed it up. And instead of trying to strip graze and keep them in very specific areas and move them on every few days, I now allow them to free range. There is a huge joy in looking out the window of the caravan in the morning and basically seeing like a UK domestic animal safari with the sheep and the pigs, and then once I've let the chickens and the goats out as well, seeing them all sort of mingle in this wild landscape. My farm, being 37 acres, is actually broken up into 5 fields, 3 quite large fields and 2 much smaller ones. And I found that by moving the sheep amongst the larger fields, they come to an established territory and they know that they stay within that field. But the fields are big, the fields are like 10 acres, 11, 12 acres. So there is plenty of ground for them to cover. There is also lots of hedgerow, lots of forage, and places for them to be as natural and live as wild a life as they can. And personally, I love it because it allows me to work alongside nature. It also allows me not to have any machinery. Now, many of the farmers around here look at my fields and just think, what a waste. He is wasting, he is destroying perfectly good farmland. I look at the land and say, what an amazing field. Yes, it's full of thistles, yes, it's full of dock, yes, it's full of weeds, but it's also absolutely teeming with wildlife. And also those thistles, those weeds, those nettles, those docks, they all get eaten by the sheep and the goats and the pigs. So they're not just eating grass or the odd daisy or the odd dandelion. They are browsing and having a really wide mixed diet. And I have found that this year, since switching to this, my sheep are so much healthier. They have grown the lambs have grown so much better than being stuck into basically single grass pastures and moved on. Now they have the access to hedgerows, to trees, to scrub. They are healthier animals. The other thing is, they are not destroying because there is so much to eat, because the land, the space of the land is so much. They're not absolutely mullering the landscape. We all know that actually sheep aren't very good animals for rewilding because they close crop the ground. And where you have sheep, you don't tend to have scrub, you don't tend to have trees because they just eat it all off. Well, it's working here. I guess the key is large area and low stocking density. Now, I haven't gone as far with my rewilding as I wanted to, because I want to completely boundary fence the entire 37 acres and allow the animals to have the entire lot in one go, rather than kind of trying to keep them in one field. But I don't have that boundary fencing all in place yet, which means that I do have to sort of restrict their territories a little bit, but it does seem to be working. There are downsides, of course. It's hard to find animals. When you want to do a sheep count, for example, you've got to actually walk around the field as I am now and look in all the crevices, because there are great swathes of thistles which hide sheep. The field that the rams are in has grass about waist high. Even when they're stood up, you can't see them, so you have to go and look. Now, I have trained the sheep to respond to a bucket, so if they're nearby and I shake the bucket, they all come running, and then I can do a bit of a count. So it's not completely awful, but it's just a slightly different way of having to manage them. So I do have to regularly come out of an evening and do a sheep count, though that's no bad thing, because then I get to walk through the fields and listen to the birds and watch the sunset and look at all the wildlife and enjoy the sheep just grazing and being as natural as possible. And I suspect to many farmers this is absolutely appalling. But as I said earlier, to me it's wonderful. Look, there is dock, there is thistle, there are some beautiful tall pieces of wavering grass, there's a lovely dorker in the middle there, wild carrot with its white flowers. And it's such a natural setting. It is a place for animals to hide, for butterflies, for bees. I can see a few meadow browns flitting around. It's wonderful. And I also find it really interesting how the landscape changes to do with where the animals have browsed and the soil. So you can see here there's a great cluster of thistles, but then as we move up this hill and we actually move onto a slightly different soil, the thistles disappear and we come across sort of this great grassy plain, which again I think is rather wonderful. Look at this thistle. It's white instead of, well, there's a whole load of them. They're white instead of purple. I've not noticed these before. Look at that. And I love exploring, because look here. This is where obviously some sheep have slept, because it's all pushed down. And then you've got all these different types of grasses. This, and then over here there's this daintier, smaller, sort of different coloured one. There is, however, no sign of the sheep yet, so we will continue looking. This is an area where there's an old quarry pit, and again you get a completely different environment, so it's much more woodland-like, foresty, sheltered. And on the odd occasion when it's really raining, that's where some of the animals will retreat to. Most often I find them in the hedgerows when it's pouring down, but often they do actually come down into this woodland area. And I've actually put in loads of, there's about 100 trees that I've done on the edge to extend the edge of this landscape out to create a little bit of a foresty area. These trees are doing quite well. Oh, and look, there's a shelter for a slug down there as well. Slug? A snail. That's a much smaller one. Now, like the goats, the chickens do have to be shut away at night because we have both badgers and foxes on site. so they have to be shut away for their own safety. But in the day, it is lovely watching the chickens out and about, foraging, and of course, as a result, they eat less food because they are being natural. They are finding bugs and scratching through the dirt. The downside, of course, is they also disappear to lay their eggs. So you're often on a little bit of an egg hunt to try and find where they lay. I find in general, chickens will find a spot, create a nest, and lay eggs there repeatedly. But if you keep picking the eggs from there, they will find a new spot. And so then you are constantly trying to find the new spot. And today I've noticed that one of the Norfolk grey hens has disappeared, and I've been searching around in this area to find her, and I have found her just here. It looks like she's laying an egg, so we'll wait until she's finished. And this is what I mean, I've just come back to the egg spot thinking, oh, there must be a load of eggs down here. There's no egg at all. So, where have you been laying? In there? One day I would love to allow the pigs to free range as well, but that requires not only fencing but electric around the fencing, because they will have the ability to push out underneath that fencing, so I do need to know where they are. It might again be a case like the goats where I allow them to go out in the day and then I bring them back at night, and they are very good at responding to the bucket. They're fantastic environmental disruptors. And you can see here the few times they've actually escaped when their electric's gone off. They have completely dug over the turf, but that uncovers a seedbed, and that allows new plants to grow and new seeds to take hold. So actually it's a really, really good thing. And I can imagine walking around the fields and then finding this big area where they favoured to go and create a wallow and pull over the ground, and there'll be all these new plants and new wildflowers, and it would actually be really, really lovely. But that's a project for the future when I have the money to completely, as I say, ring fence the property. Look at this, guys. I've just done an entire trek of the field. I'm back here, and look who's over here. The lamb and her mum, his mum. Can you believe it? I should say I don't normally lamb at this time of the year and in the field. I'm far too much of a control freak, and there is also far too many potential issues with lambing sheep to allow them just to disappear off and lamb in a field, and then you have to go and find them, especially when I've got all these nooks and crannies that they can lamb. However, she was a lamb from last year. A ram got in, she got pregnant, and so we had a random lamb in the middle of July. But she had, and it was rather wonderful, she's had the most natural lambing process ever. She's been out all year on pasture, foraging, getting all of her food. She then snuck off and disappeared into a hedge to have the lamb, and I found the lamb in the morning. She had the one lamb, and then when she was ready, she came back onto the pasture with the lamb to show it off to everybody, and it's kind of the most natural you could have got for her. And now she's right down here. So I have to admit, I love my little patch of wild farm. Farming this way is not without its problems, as I've spoken about some of them, but it does allow me to have as most natural setting as possible, and as a result I do have a farm that's absolutely teeming with wildlife, and the animals live as natural life as they can. And I adore sheep, and actually there is nothing better in my opinion than looking out and seeing your flock of sheep picking amongst the thistles when it's sunny, lying down to cool off and just living their best lives.